Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm Allison Korn, clinical professor and director of the Health Justice Clinic at Duke Law School. And I'd love to welcome you to our Teaching Justice webinar series and our final session for 2022. Today, we are so excited to introduce Participatory Scholarship and Redeeming Justice. Our presenters today are Rachel Lopez from Drexel University Thomas R. Kline School of Law, as well as Ghani Songster and Rell Carter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Layla Halas. I'm a clinical professor at Tulane Law School and a former co-chair of CLEA's Best Practices and Pedagogy Committee. And today's talk is part of this larger Best Practices, Teaching Justice webinar series, which is a project of the Best Practices Committee of CLEA. We are so excited. We've featured really innovative faculty and also amazing advocates in the community as part of this series, talking about new approaches to teaching justice, really focused on building upon social movements and how we bring that into the classroom. So each session has drawn on kind of wisdom of different social movements, really thinking about intersections between immigration, economic justice, the criminal legal system, racial, economic, among many other issues. And so we really have had this amazing lineup, and we have a really exciting spring lineup as well. So please stay tuned, check out the CLEA website and all of the listservs, and we will provide more updates as well as give you the lineup of the actual dates for the spring.
And as you may have seen already, this session, like all of our others, will be recorded and it will be made available on the CLEA website. We will be sure and circulate that information and the link after the session concludes. As always, we encourage a lot of interaction using the chat function. And if you have a question during the session, you can use the chat function to raise it in real time. And I believe our presenters will also make time during the presentation or at the end to answer questions using the video function or the chat function, whatever you prefer. We do ask everyone to please mute their microphones for the presentation, but if you're comfortable, you are welcome to keep your video on during the session. And now, again, we are just thrilled and grateful to turn it over to our amazing presenters today.
We just want to take a minute to express our gratitude to Allison and Layla. This is such an incredible opportunity for us, not only to share our work, but also to reflect on the process of our writing together and the future of our writing together. And so we just wanted to acknowledge the both of you. You put so much energy and light to this work, and we're grateful for the opportunity to be here today. We have sort of already been introduced. We were going to start with introductions, but I want to just maybe give my, in the interest of sharing storytelling and lived experience, I want to give my co-authors a chance to introduce themselves, starting with Rell.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to repeat how grateful I am for this opportunity. So my name is Terrell Woolfolk. Actually, Rell Carter is a name that it's a vestige of my incarceration that I'm still trying to shake off. I was condemned to die in prison. I spent 30 years of my life in prison, but through the grace of God, I was able to regain my freedom through a commutation process that they have in Pennsylvania. I got out by the skin of my teeth. I feel extremely lucky, extremely blessed. And like I said, I'm just real appreciative right now of having this opportunity to be here or to be home, period. I'm just real fortunate, and I'm like living in this space of joy right now. So I'm ready to get to it.
Ghani, do you want to say a couple words about yourself?
Yes. Also, was it just me, or was there a problem with hearing Rell? I just want to know if it's just on my end. Did everybody hear Rell clearly? Because he seemed to have been going in and out. If you don't hear me clearly, just signal me or something like that. But anyway, my name is Kempis Songster. A lot of people affectionately. How do I sound now? Am I still breaking up?
No, you good.
Okay, my name is Kempis Songster. A lot of people affectionately know me as Ghani. I was sentenced to life without parole or death by incarceration at the age of 15 in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, unlike other states, life without parole is not where you do any amount of years, be it 20, 25, 30, or whatever number, and then you're eligible to see the parole board. In Pennsylvania, life without parole means that you're sent to prison effectively to die. And so I'm only here because of some US Supreme Court rulings that came about, beginning with Miller versus Alabama in 2012, and then supported by Montgomery versus Louisiana in 2016, that said that it's unconstitutional to sentence children to mandatory life without parole. And people who are sentenced, such as myself, should be resentenced. And so I was released on December 28th of 2017, after serving 30 plus years in prison myself. So it's I can't express how much of an appreciation I have for being here. That comes from a deep place.
And Ghani is joining us. He actually is at an all-day long work meeting and is able to join us, just unfortunately for a half hour, but we're so grateful that he was able to sneak away to join us for a bit here. I wanted to start a little bit by explaining the title of the webinar series. So, it's called Participatory Scholarship and Redeeming Justice. And I thought we might start off by just talking a little bit about what we mean when we say participatory scholarship. And so part of what's kind of funny about this is really we didn't come up with that term before writing Redeeming Justice. It's something that we reflected on. What was our purpose in writing Redeeming Justice? Why did we feel like it was important to write this piece that ended up winning the LSA article prize, which is definitely a surprise to us. And so part of what we've been doing now and are engaging in is looking back and sort of reflecting on what is it that we were trying to achieve. And part of it is trying to understand the importance of scholarship that is written in collaboration with people that don't have formal training in law, but have expertise in laws in justice. And so part of what we're hoping to do today is maybe encourage all of you to think about ways that you could engage in participatory law scholarship. And so I wanted to start off by just turning it over to my co-authors and talking a little bit more about what this enterprise of participatory law scholarship is, and why lived experience is important as a part of legal scholarship. So I'm going to start it off by asking Rell, sort of how do you define, or what is lived experience, and what do you think it can contribute to legal scholarship?
Lived experience is the real life impact of scholarships created by mostly men who have no idea about what that impact is. And so there's real life implications to theories that people discuss in rooms outside of the areas where these theories affect people. And so the lived experience is that narration. It is the telling of stories that usually aren't told when people are having scholarly discussions about law. Lived experience is the living contradiction between legal intent and what's happening in real life to people. And so what it can contribute is a different perspective, right? It allows for the impact and what goes wrong to be heard, listened to, and hopefully be the catalyst of things being done differently.
Picking up on what Rell said about the power of storytelling, Ghani, storytelling, as you know, has always been a part of law. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us what you see as the difference between storytelling that occurs in pieces like Redeeming Justice and Participatory Scholarship and stories that are told in the cases that have impacted your life.
Yeah, certainly. And that's a great question, Rachel. You know, one of the things that have always fascinated me behind the walls when fighting my own case is learning about the what actually happened in a case, you know, hearing the narrative in a case, right? But what I also found lacking, you know, in case law was context. You know what I'm saying? Was backstories, deeper circumstances. You know what I mean? The complexities in each narrative. And that's the between stories like, you know, that we have in case law and that stories that we have when you're like in Redeeming Justice, when we have people with lived experience telling their stories, right? You get a context that it seems like case law is devoid of. You know, I remember Daniel Sered spoke about, she said it best in her book, Until We Reckon, Violence, Mass Incarceration and a Road to Repair, where she said, in our zero-sum system, complexity is a liability, right? And I think it behooves all of us, you know, that are interested in justice, that are interested in, you know, creating a better world, right? Creating justice systems that speak to the best in what it means to be human, right? And come up with new ways for addressing harm, right? That we lift up that complexity, that we delve deep into the complications behind each case, right? And I think Redeeming Justice or Participatory Scholarship, with its inclusion of lived experience or voices of directly impacted people, brings that element that's missing in normal case law.
Thank you so much, Ghani. We thought that it might be helpful as you think about whether you might be interested in engaging in participatory law scholarship to give you a sense of what we wrote and sort of what the significance of Redeeming Justice was for us. So we're going to turn for a moment just to kind of give you a sense of what this actually looks like in practice by sharing with you the article that we co-authored together that was published in the Northwestern Law Review last year. I'm going to put a PowerPoint on at this moment. And so hopefully you'll all be able to see that. So can everybody, it's all good? So this sort of, the article that we co-wrote together, I wanted to just start by maybe giving a little bit of the backstory of how it came about. I met Rell and Ghani as part of a clinic project that we did in collaboration with a group of incarcerated men in SCI Phoenix, a state prison outside of Philadelphia. And the project's title was actually The Right to Redemption. So we spent really nearly a year learning about this conception of the right to redemption that was developed by Rell and Ghani and their fellow members of actually a think tank inside behind prison walls. And part of what catalyzed this is actually the pandemic, because we were cut off from nearly all communication with Rell and others on the inside of the think tank. Ghani's an outside member of the think tank. And wanted to find a way to continue to move this work forward, despite the fact that we couldn't move forward in the way that we had anticipated with the project. And so that's sort of where the idea of Redeeming Justice came from. The argument that we make in our article was really developed by Rell and Ghani and members of a group called the Right to Redemption Committee. Rell, do you want to just say a couple of words about the committee?
Yeah, Right to Redemption is a committee that was a part of a larger organization called Lifers Inc., organization in the state of Pennsylvania that was charged with securing parole eligibility for death by incarceration sentences. Now, the understanding of the right to redemption was developed through a collective process with fellow members of Right to Redemption. Our article is thus grounded in the lived experience and analytical labor of the Right to Redemption Committee. The group explicitly conceptualized the right as a human right and emphasize how the United States criminal legal system denies that right.
And so drawing from the analysis and theory of the Right to Redemption Committee, in our article, we argue that all people have the capacity for change, and that characteristic is so core to the human condition that all people should have a right to redemption. This was sort of the fundamental concept, and really it's sort of serendipitously, this happened after we developed the idea for the article, but it became the subject of a Supreme Court case. And indeed, the question that is the primary subject of our article was asked during oral argument at a case called Jones v. Mississippi. I'm going to play that clip now.
Mr. Shapiro, if you have it in front of you, could you just repeat the first sentence of your presentation this morning?
Yes, Your Honor. The first sentence was settled law recognizes the scientific, legal, and moral truth that most children, even those who commit grievous crimes, are capable of redemption.
Yeah, I think you are. This is fascinating. You want to take us and you want us to take the courts of this country into very deep theological and psychological waters. Do you think that there are any human beings who are not capable of redemption?
So this was a case involving whether in order for a court to sentence a juvenile to life without parole, if they needed to find someone essentially permanently incorrigible or irredeemable. And I'm going to turn it to Rell now to give an introduction to sort of his answer to this question.
All right, so what you're about to hear now is an audio recording of my voice that had to be smuggled through the concrete sound barriers that were designed, I believe, to muffle the voice of millions.
Before I attempt to answer Alito's question whether or not there are people who are beyond redemption, I would like to first establish the preface. Preface being, as a member of Right to Redemption, I have to ground my answer in a couple of our basic principles. Number one, all human beings born of debilitating apathy have a capacity to atone for their transgressions. And this characteristic is one of the things that distinguishes us from the other animals. Number two, because it is a uniquely human attribute, it falls into the category of an unalienable right. So to curtail, strip, or deny the right to exercise this capacity is a gross human rights violation. So, with that being said, mandatory death by incarceration sentences deny an individual's ability to exercise this capacity. This, as my good friend Ghani would say, for prescient application of a law, flies in the face of the founding principles of this country. CDI sentences inherently mean that a human being is bereft of the capacity to try and make right wrong. But how is that possible if this ability is unalienable? It's only possible if we conceive capacity with the act. So let us, in having these discussions, be clear in the distinction between the two. All human beings have the capacity to redeem themselves, but all human beings may not exercise this ability. To not exercise it doesn't mean that one doesn't have it. The laws of the greatest democracy the world has ever known, if they are just laws, it simply reflect them. They should also always embody the words of one of the founding fathers and authors of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, who said that, quote, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, unquote. Jefferson understood that true freedom couldn't exist without the recognition and respect of what makes us human. To not recognize or respect these attributes is to invite oppression and abuse. So with that being said, human beings should never be separated from their capacity to make amends. So
This is a call from SCI, Phoenix State Correctional Institution. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
So, to Alito's question, I say resoundingly that no human being is beyond redemption. because we all, even in the worst situation, unequivocally have the capacity to atone. This, I believe, is the very essence of who we are as a species. And to truly understand and embody this principle is what allows, in the words of the United States Supreme Court, an evolving standard of decency that marks the progression of a maturing society.
So part of the idea of participatory law scholarship, so Alito mentioned in answering his questions, both theological basis for answering the question, scientific bases for answering the question. Part of what we believe the purpose of participatory law scholarship is essentially allowing reality on the ground, those who have lived experience, to also, have a voice in the debate of what should happen to them. That's sort of the fundamental principle of participatory law scholarship. It's also really linked to the idea that movement should have a role in voicing their understanding of what the law, how to interpret the law, and what the law should be. And this was the case in Redeeming Justice as well. It came out, as Rell and Ghani have described, a movement of men who were sentenced to life without parole in SCI Phoenix. And I'm hopeful that Rell and Ghani can just give us a little bit of insight into why this group was formed and how they came up with this conception of the right to redemption.
So yeah, for me, it's a part of this whole idea about the right to redemption, and the right to redemption committee is literally a part of me. The committee was formed because at the time, the president of the Lifers organization was at his wit's end, because for years there had been no movement towards parole eligibility. He believed that the organization itself had become spread a little bit too thin, that it was involved in all these other things, and what it was designed to do, secure parole eligibility, became lost in all those other things. It became lost in the means to acquire. And so as a result, he got a few of us together to form, another committee who was charged with specifically find an answer to this, see what we can do in order to secure parole eligibility for BBI sentences. So that was our charge. I forget how many it was of us in the beginning. Guy, you remember? Probably 8, 9 of us, something like that.
It was about 8 of us, and the president at the time, Wayne Battles, he called us together in the drab auditorium of Great. You can't hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. So the president at the time, he called a group of us together, and he had no answers for the static and stagnant state that the fight to end life without parole or get parole eligibility for lifers in Pennsylvania was in at the time. He had no answers. The only thing he could think to do was to call people together, people that he thought exhibited some kind of activism in the prison, some type of leadership in the prison, that were creative, that were involved in all kind of community initiatives inside and outside the prison. And perhaps that's really, that was really the most important part, was to call people together. Because once people come together, then anything is possible. And so we met first in the drab auditorium of the prison, and then we moved to the gym area in the weight rooms. We met in the weight rooms, and in other, whatever spaces we could find in the prison became a critical space that we engaged in debate and discussing with each other about how do we get parole eligibility for people sentenced to die in prison. And we've decided that, hey, and we also wanted to identify what the issues are, what were our challenges, what was the problem with, why life without parole or ending life without parole was such an unpopular issue, right? And that's when we realized that some of the biggest supporters of life without parole were the opponents of the death penalty, right? Which presented a complicated scenario for us, because we always saw people fighting to end the death penalty as our allies, right? And we thought that, they could prove a death penalty is wrong on its philosophical and moral face, right? Without necessarily throwing us, people who were serving life without parole, under the bus to make that point, right? But we didn't think that they were doing it because of malice, or they didn't care. We just didn't think that they really understood that life without parole in Pennsylvania was just as fatal and final as the death penalty. And so that was one important realization for us. And we realized that, hey, we have to change the language. We have to change the way we thought and talked about this sentence, which is why we decided to stop calling the sentence life or life without parole. Right. That was one of the main things with Right to Redemption. We decided to call it what it is, death by incarceration, because we didn't think a sentence that was so associated with death should be called something as beautiful as life. Right. Also, we decided that we had to change the way we even approached the sentence. A lot of us were very critical about the way we were sentenced. We were very critical about the criminal legal system that sentenced us, right? And we realized that, hey, you know what? We have to stop approaching this from a position of entitlement. We're not necessarily entitled to be free. Yes, some of us were in prison unjustly. Some of us were in prison for, and we're innocent. But some of us were connected to the loss of someone's family member, some human life, right? And we had to acknowledge that, right? We had to acknowledge that some of us are connected to a lot of pain. And our redemption could only be realized when we took accountability, right? And so there was no separation between our accountability and our redemption. We had to we came to that realization. And it was hard for a lot of us, because a lot of us did not confront that. We weren't taught to confront that because of how consequential the system makes it for owning up to what you did. We're told from day one, anything you say can and will be used against you in the law, in court. We're told by our lawyers to, maintain your innocence or plead not guilty. We maintain our innocence when we go upstate. If we lose the case and we end up being sentenced, and we maintain our innocence through the appellate process if we're not innocent. This is what we're taught to do, right? And
how do we do that, Ghani? We do that by making stories up. We tell these lies.
We tell the lies to ourselves.
We tell them to ourselves, and we tell them so much, we begin to believe the lies. The lies become the truth.
They become the truth.
And then it's hard, it's difficult, because we be so concerned about the process that we forget about that pain that you just mentioned.
Right.
We're not even aware of it. We're just wrapped up in the process and the unfairness of it.
Some of us join religion. Some of us join organizations. Some of us become well-read. We develop a political analysis, right? Some of us develop a geopolitical analysis, and we abhor war. We abhor violence all around the world. We abhor the violence that we see in our communities from behind the walls. But we've not come to terms with the role that we played in violence ourselves when we were out there. And so it develops a split personality, if you will. It develops a hypocrisy. Do you
remember me and you having a conversation, and I kind of was struggling with these two ideas that couldn't reconcile this individual responsibility with societal responsibility. Because in my mind, I'm like, yo, I am the way that I am because of my circumstance, and so like I couldn't reconcile those two things. I'm like, what do you mean? If not for this wouldn't have happened. Nobody's holding people who create conditions accountable. It's all on me. You remember what you told me?
All right. I remember.
Let me tell that story.
But you want me to retell the story?
Yeah, let me tell it.
Go ahead, you tell it.
So me and Ghani, like I kind of like came to him with this irreconcilable difference in my mind. And he said, Rell, man, he said, imagine you had to stand before a panel of judges and to convince them why it was a good idea for you to be released. And it's something that you have been preparing for months and months and months. And so finally, the day comes, you have this opportunity to speak. You're in front of this panel in a room, and somebody in the back, right before you're about to speak, somebody stands up in the back, a woman, and says, "But you killed my son." He said, "What would you say to that woman?" Can you remember what my face looked like when you asked me that question?
I remember you were stumped.
I was stuck. I was stuck because I never thought about that. I never thought about that mother. I was so consumed about what happened to me. I was stuck in this selfish bubble of the process being so unfair that I never considered the pain that I caused. And so I was stuck in that moment for a few seconds. And then I said, man, sorry. Remember what you said after that?
That's the only thing you could say.
Only thing I can say.
In that moment.
And in that moment, I understood that irreconcilable disagreement in my brain became reconcilable. I was able to understand that you can take full responsibility for the harm that you committed by recognizing that mother's pain, and at the same time, hold society to account.
And that's when your redemption really begins. That's when you can't separate accountability from redemption, because both of them requires that agency and requires that acknowledgement of your role in pain. You know what I'm saying? And so the other piece was, yeah, there are certain, we're very well of social determinants and political and economical determinants behind the acts, you know what I mean, of people, especially in socially toxic environments like inner cities, right? But for us, that wasn't the empowering conversation to have. The empowering conversation to have was, okay, we're aware of these determinants, but how do we resist that? How do we decide differently? How do we choose differently, right? How do we choose to be more than the worst thing that we ever did, right? And we think that is the ultimate question. That's the question that leads to change, or that leads to transformation, that leads to redemption. And the sentence to life without parole forecloses that human capacity, right? It denies that human capacity to do that. And so, yeah, Rachel, I guess that was kind of like a spontaneous off script answer to your question about the birth of the right to redemption. And then we wanted to study more about what redemption means, you know, because we had grew up with a different concept of redemption, which was really influenced by religion. But the real definitions of redemption, according to the dictionary, was something different. You know what I mean? It was about buying back something. You know, it was basically about a financial transaction. And so we decided that we would redefine what redemption is for us. Redemption meant, you know, becoming fully responsible, choosing to be better than what we were, and choosing to take responsibility, not just for our own lives, but for the impact of our actions and what goes on in the world. Choosing to be socially and environmentally and ecologically responsible and contributing members of our society. No one could take that from us. No sentence could take that from us, right? But when a sentence denies you the capacity to express that, it is effectively saying that, you know, human beings don't have the capacity to be better. And we don't think anybody has the right to tell me that I can be better, or that Rell can't be better, because we are better.
And so another thing that we kind of like came up with during that time was the fact we recognized that the right to redeem oneself is a unique human capacity, and it's what separates us from all the other animals on the planet. This idea that, or this capacity that we can make amends, that we can atone for transgressions, and to deny somebody that is to deny them the right to be human. And so as a result of that, we say, okay, this is a human rights struggle, and we need to petition United Nations eventually, which just recently happened, by the way.
Yep. So this might be a good transition point to talk about what was so, I think there's so many reasons why this article felt like just a unique moment in time, but I was doing some research on behalf of the think tank and on behalf of this group, and I came across a case in the European Court of Human Rights that essentially affirmed everything that the Right to Redemption Committee had been telling me all year long, which is that there is a right to hope, and that this right to hope, this human right to hope, means that individuals cannot be indefinitely confined to detention, that all sentences, all people that are serving these sentences must be offered the possibility of redemption. And if that is obtained, release should be the ultimate result. And so this case, Vintner v. UK, sort of gave us some of the grounding for which we could base our article and really sort of uplift what the Right to Redemption Committee was saying in parallel to the European Court of Human Rights, really recognizing that indeed the right to redemption is a human right. And then myself and a number of students did a deep dive into this idea of the right to hope and how it appeared in jurisdictions really across the world. It was quite impressive to see that we are really, in many ways, an outlier in this respect in terms of how we understand life without parole sentences. And another piece of this research, right, is that the US has really taken a much different approach that reaffirmed, Ghani and Rell described this idea of death by incarceration and why life without parole is death by incarceration. And in fact, the jurisprudence of the US Supreme Court confirms that. It in fact says that a life without parole sentence is meant to be a denial of hope by design. It's meant to reaffirm the idea that there are those who are incapable of redemption. That's really, in essence, what life without parole sentences actually mean. And so these ideas and concepts, this analytical work that was happening behind bars, was not only reflected in the conversations of Ghani and Rell and their colleagues, but also in case law, both international case law and domestic case law. And so part of the sort of shining light for us is that we were able to see a way in which the right to redemption, if courts desired, could be incorporated into US jurisprudence through the Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment again and again reaffirms this idea of human dignity. The idea is that we cannot subject people to cruel and unusual punishment because we have an underlying human dignity that should not be impinged upon. And of course, we were able to see how the US Supreme Court often looks to international law for guidance about how to interpret the Eighth Amendment, and found, basically are arguing that it should look to this jurisprudence abroad and in constitutional courts across the world, and also the analytical work of the Right to Redemption Committee to find a right to redemption. So that's sort of like the legal understanding of human dignity and why we think legally life without parole or death by incarceration is a violation of the Eighth Amendment. But I'm wondering if we could, of course, as we've really presented here, the law doesn't always present the full picture. And so I'm wondering if and I see Ghani's still on, so maybe I'll turn it to him first, because I know he has to run in a moment here. If you could talk a bit about, apart from the legal perspective, what is the lived experience of feeling like your human dignity has been denied by life without parole sentence?
Yeah, kind of like what Rell and I were talking about before. It's almost like, if I was to use a symbol that a lot of people could identify with, it'll probably be the phantom zone, in the Superman stories, of being in a space where you have no voice, where everything is inaudible, and everyone, it seems like society at large, is in favor of your situation, right? Of you being there. And no matter what you do to change or be better, it's almost as if that doesn't matter. You know, where you see people around you who get their bachelor's, their master's, and their PhDs on your cell block, being treated the same way as somebody that's in fights every day, preying on other incarcerated people, in solitary confinement all the time, in disciplinary custody, seeing family members grow old and die, you know, and you not being able to say goodbye to them, right? And it's not even a thing about you wanting society to feel pity or sorry for you, but you want somebody to believe that, hey, you know, I am not that person anymore, and that I can make a contribution, that I have the capacity to grab an oar to help steer the ship around from going over a waterfall, you know, that we see happening in a lot of our communities. I do have something to say about the violence that's taken place in my neighborhoods. I do want to try my hand at some ideas that have occurred to me about how to solve that. I am invested in the health and well-being of my communities now. I do want to atone, right? And to having that not matter at all, you know, to live with that, right, is a nightmarish kind of existence, you know, and to live without hope at all, you know, without even, without even just in constant despair, without even a chance of making good, with a chance to show society that, hey, human beings do have the capacity to change, you know, to live with that is a nightmarish existence in itself. Meanwhile, you're seeing friends that you've prayed with, that have mentored you, that you've ate with, that you've studied with, grow old and die, being carted off the cell blocks in gurneys, you know, never to be brought back, only to hear that they died in hospice, right? Alone, right? And you wonder, is this justice? Is this what being an evolved species is supposed to be about, right? You read about redemption in the Bible. You read about how Moses took someone's life, but became a blessed person and was able to contribute, you know, make contributions that last the test of time. You read about David being responsible for the death of someone over his wife, but being able to make contributions to humanity that last the test of time. You read about Saul, who presided over the massacre of countless Christians, you know, but became recognized as the 13th apostle. You see stories in Hollywood about redemption, about Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader, you know what I'm saying, becoming, you know, accepted again. You know, you read all of these, you know, redemption is always in the Bible and in popular culture, just a notion of the human capacity for change, of the prodigal son, somebody doing wrong and then righting themselves is such a romantic notion. But in real life, as it relates to life without parole, the real life that we experience, that people like Rell and I experience, redemption is not really part of our criminal legal system and not a part of our culture. It's not something that we've experienced that's readily accepted. The only reason that we're out here now is by some great miracles. The miracles of a US Supreme Court rulings that said, like I said, that children are different, and one that process, which is an even greater miracle because the chances of making commutation in the state of Pennsylvania is very small. And so to live with that is something despairing entirely.
Ghani, I see that we're almost at the hour here, and I know that Rell also wanted to share something that he recently wrote as a part of our collaboration, a book review that we wrote together. So I wanted to invite Rell to share that piece of written work, but I also wanted to invite those who are with us today to put questions in the chat if you have them for us. We also have some questions we can discuss if there's time, but I just really wanted to give Rell a chance to read his contribution and describe sort of what his experience of life without parole was and why it impinged on human dignity.
Right. Yeah, so Ghani kind of touched on what I'm about to read a little bit, because I was a hospice volunteer. So this is a part of that. It was dark, always dark. The only light, a pale glow flickering off the walls, emanating from the 40-inch TV mounted on the wall. There was the smell, pungent stench of decay and disease, always there, not overpowering, but just enough to stay with you always. An extremely lonely place, filled with fear and an expectation of being alone forever. I had been a hospice volunteer for a few years at this point, called to duty to serve my brothers in need. Our numbers had grown over the years from a handful to over a couple dozen, which was good because it gave us time to decompress. We were guardians against fear, ushers to the unknown. It was a difficult post because it called for us to provide comfort to people we knew and loved who were making a transition from this life to whatever lies beyond. Being a hospice volunteer in the bowels of the beast exposed me to a human frailty laid bare by disease. I had to sit by while the people I love slowly began to break down, their physical and mental selves withering away to nothing. For the first time, I truly understood the finality of my sentence. Nobody wants to die alone. There's a palpable fear that exists when a human being knows that the end is near and there's no one there to see them through. I've held hands, I've sang songs, I've sat quietly, my presence just enough to provide a little solace. But what happens when there is no one? When human beings are hidden from sight in dark rooms that smell of rotten death, soiled, knowing that they are going to die an undignified death, craving for just a little human compassion. But the only people around who can give it are strangers who think they deserve to die alone.
So this sort of gives you insight into the lived experience of Ghani and Rell, but also I think it's important to understand that this part of why we see pieces like Redeeming Justice as being so important is because, like Ghani described, people didn't understand life without parole sentences as being cruel and unusual. They saw it as the humane alternative to the death penalty. And so a piece of this is bringing light to the real lived experience of that and why it's relevant for the legal analysis under the 8th Amendment. We want to sort of just, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a minute and see if folks have, let's see here, questions for us. We also have some questions for each other in case it's helpful to sort of fill the time, but I really encourage you if you're, I see a couple of questions coming through. So Carla, do you want to just ask your question real quick?
Sure. I just was wondering, how would you compare participatory research to ethnographic methodologies that are used in anthropology?
That's a great question. It actually came up in a presentation I did at Tulane with Layla a few weeks ago, and I've given some more thought to it. Really, I think that the difference here is how knowledge is produced, right? An ethnographic study, of course, I'm not an ethnographer, but the scientific method really, of course, is being embedded with communities and learning from them and that informing scholarly production. But there is something distinct about participatory law scholarship to the extent that it's not just about observing and the scholar going back and reporting their findings. It's really about developing theory and legal analysis alongside people like Rell and Ghani and developing really legal prescriptions about what the law should be to be more just and fair, drawing from not just the lived experience. And Rell and I have had a lot of really interesting conversations about this recently as well. So he'll probably want to jump in here too. But it's also about the intellectual work that the Right to Redemption Committee did. It was not me who developed this idea of the right to redemption, it was them. And that's the significance here. It's redefining who is capable of reading and interpreting the law and making prescriptions about how it could be better.
Yeah, there's an idea that persists that lived experience is simply the experience of our lives, like, but it's more than just what we've been through, specifically in the courts. It's about our scholarship. It's about what we've learned in combination with what we've lived. And so I think a lot of times people don't understand that decade upon decade upon decade in prisons, we learn a lot. It may not be a traditional way of learning, but learning nevertheless. It's something that we bring to the table, and it gives us a unique perspective that other people don't have because we've lived it and we've studied it. I think that makes a huge difference. And I think it's important for people to know that it's not just about what we've lived through, but it's also about what we've learned, what we've studied.
Thank you for the response. It's a self-interested question because I've been doing a lot of auto-ethnographic work and ethnographic work with my clients on the racialization of immigrants that arrive in the United States. So I would love to continue the conversation with you because I think, storytelling grounds the law, and we should all, use these methodologies when we're thinking about especially law reform. Thank you for the presentation.
Can I just say one more thing? One of the things that I've learned over the years is that no matter what I know, there's always something that I can learn from somebody else. Like no matter who it is, everybody has something to bring to the table. And I think a lot of times what happens is, particularly with people who've experienced the things that I've experienced, the things that Ghani experienced, people underestimate what we have to say, right? Because there's a persistent perspective about who we are as people. And so what this does, I think, is it shatters that perspective, because now it allows people to see what we have to offer, especially when we're talking about the criminal legal system.
Mm-hmm. Rell, I have a question for you. I'm just curious if you would share why. I know why I decided to write Redeeming Justice, but why did you decide to write Redeeming Justice?
So, a couple things. So at the time when Redeeming Justice was the idea of writing this article was presented to me, we were in it was the height of the pandemic. We were locked in a cell 23 hours and 45 minutes a day. We were only coming out for 15 minutes a day. I was in a cell with somebody I really didn't like, so it was an extremely difficult circumstance. There was nothing stimulating for me, intellectually wise. There was nothing to stimulate me. And it felt like my brain was atrophying. It felt like I was catching stupid, if that makes any sense. And it was a difficult time. And so when you reached out to me and asked me did I want to participate, I was just like, whoa, thank you. Thank you. It gave me an opportunity to not only exercise my mind again, but it also gave me an opportunity to express some things that I felt like desperately needed to be expressed in a way that hasn't been expressed before. So like it was a joy. I was like one of the highlights of my life really for the last few years. This opportunity that I had to contribute to this article, because I thought it was something that needed to be done, because, the law in Pennsylvania is still what it is. Like Ghani kind of like talked about briefly, like how difficult it was for me to get out of prison. Like, this is not an easy thing. The commutation process, 40 of us went out, only 5 of us got out. Just recently, another group of 40 went up, only 3 made it through, and they still got another round to go, so they might not all make it. It's an extremely difficult situation, and so it's very important to me, and it has always been, to secure parole eligibility, because there are a lot of guys that are still behind bars that are just as deserving as I am. And during the time that this article was being written, I had no idea that in a few months down the line that I would be home. So it was extremely important for me at the time that I, expressed what I expressed in that article, because I felt like it was a means for me to be able to secure my freedom, which it actually did. In a personal way.
Leah, I think you said we had one last question.
Yeah, we had one last question. I saw in the chat, and Lauren, did you want to pose it and unmute if you can?
Yeah, hi. This question, thank you so much for this. This was wonderful. I loved it, just listening to you all talk. But I wanted to know, Terrell, if you had any specific advice for law professors looking to write with a client or former client, any specific advice?
I think the only advice that I would have is suspend whatever expectation that you might have, and whatever perceptions that you may have. Try to arrest those, and deal with people on a human level. Matter of fact, I'm not going to tell you to suspend your expectations, but have high expectations. Let them not meet it, as opposed to low expectations. Have super high expectations. So, and I'm thinking, like, if you do, then you won't be surprised, because guys are, you got some brilliant guys inside these penitentiaries, and they all have something to offer. So, whatever perceptions that you have about who people are, suspend them, and just go into it with an open mind, and be prepared to be surprised.
Thanks so much, everyone. I think we're coming on the end of time. Rachel or Terrell, if you wanted to say any last words, we obviously want to give you that space. I'm really grateful for your generosity of time today.
I just want to say thank you. Like, once again, like, I'm super appreciative of this opportunity that I have for not only being able to talk in this space right now, but just to be out here, period. Like, I'm extremely grateful, and I was looking forward to this, and I'm super excited that it's finally here, and I was able to participate, because Rachel and Ghani did a couple while I was still in prison. So it's just good to be able to be out here and to contribute in this way. So I'm just grateful.
I'll just say ditto. So grateful, and feeling so lucky to have Rell and Ghani as my partners in this work.
Well, thanks, everyone. I think we're going to end it there. And just like, what a powerful ending to this series for the semester. Really grateful for everyone who was part of the conversation. And we look forward to posting the video and talking to folks in the spring. Thanks.
Thanks so much.